Some 30 years ago, School S-21 in Phnom Penh stopped giving lessons. Its classrooms became instead the scene of unimaginable horror. Some 15,000 people were tortured to death in these classrooms during the rule of the Khmer Rouge. But now, some of the people responsible may finally face justice. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we ask, is Cambodia's long national nightmare nearing an end? For this edition of 101 East, we've brought together three guests with deep personal knowledge of the country. Professor David Chandler is one of the world's foremost scholars of modern Cambodian history, about which he's written numerous books, including a political biography of the Khmer Rouge leader, Pol Pot. Poi Kia is a Cambodian journalist, a survivor of the democratic Kampuchea regime. His father was one of the Khmer Rouge's victims. Separated from his family in 1975, he was forced to work in a children's camp until the Vietnamese troops entered Cambodia in 1979. And John Swain is an award-winning British journalist who spent 5 years in Cambodia and South Vietnam as a war correspondent. He was one of the few Westerners left in Phnom Penh when the victorious Khmer Rouge marched into the capital. His role was portrayed in the film The Killing Fields. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Poi Kia, let me begin with you. We are, it seems, poised at the start of what may be real action after 30 years in this Cambodian story. How will the people here react, do you think, when they begin to see action taking place?
Well, the majority of the Cambodian people are happy to see the process moving on, and they wish that the former Khmer Rouge leader will be punished, and this is what they wish, and because of the reason that they have suffered for a long time ago, and they want to see these people responsible.
Do they think this should have happened sooner?
Well, they were very much frustrated with this process because it was very a long process and dragged on since 1997.
We haven't actually seen the Cambodian population making much demand for this process, though.
It depends on how access we are, to what extent. The point is that we did not have like a very open forum of public opinion to let them express themselves. It's very limited so far.
David, why is it that we are 30 years on and only now beginning to see this taking place?
Well, it's a long story. I don't go into all the details, but the first 10 years, of course, was when Cambodia was isolated and the Western world was not pushing for these trials. The last 10 years, since there's been some pressure, there's been all kinds of difficulties on both sides of the bargaining table to how to form this tribunal, how to put it together.
But in real terms, there's an absence of political will, surely. I mean, one can talk about, well, there was this and there was that, but...
Well, certainly, you have to see, it certainly looks as if there's an absence of political will. You can't document it because people don't come out and say, we do not want this trial to take place. But were there more political will, it would have been much quicker.
John, going back to what Poi Kia said, I mean, the absence of any real upswell of emotion within the country itself has been an interesting feature of what's been going on. Now, when you came back here in 1979, when the Khmer Rouge were finally gone, what did you find? Did you find a population that was hungry for some kind of accountability?
I didn't find a population which was hungry for accountability. I found a population which was on its knees, which just wanted to survive. And it hadn't got beyond that stage. It was the city which we're sitting in now was empty. There were still banknotes in the streets from when the Khmer Rouge took over in 1975 and blew up the National Bank, and nothing had been cleared. The city was crumbling. It was devastated, and all the people who were living here, who had come back here in 1979, weren't even the population of the city, because most of the population of the city...
So we are sitting here in Tuol Sleng, one of probably the most notorious example of exactly what happened during those years. And it's now a tourist resort and seemingly fairly benign. And the Cambodians don't seem to mind that people like us are overrunning their history in this way. Is this a surprise to you?
No, it depends on people and depends on whom you ask. And to me, I think, again, well, we just want to have at least this kind of justice bring about to Cambodian people.
What do you think justice here will involve, John?
I don't think there is justice. I mean, we in the West are trying to seek justice over evil, and it's already too late in this country. The main perpetrators of what happened here, of the Khmer Rouge so Holocaust, are very old men and dead, and they're tilling their gardens up in Pailin and places. The ones who will be finally brought to this court. I think what happened in Cambodia was a situation where people were both perpetrators and victims of what the Khmer Rouge did, and this is a very murky sort of world where it's very difficult to have any real justice in international Western terms.
Let's try and identify the scale of the crime then. I mean, we can't identify any real scale of justice, but the crime itself, David, I mean, describe the history of what it is we're looking at here.
Well, it looks as if the estimates now are that during the Khmer Rouge period, 75, 79, somewhere between 1.5 million and 2 million people died, what I call regime-related deaths. I mean, they would not have died if it were not for policies or behavior on the part of the regime. Of those, perhaps 300,000, 400,000 were executed as enemies of the state. In other words, they were murdered. 15,000 of them right here in Tuol Sleng S21, as it was called. It's massive scale. I mean, per capita, this was a big mess. For this was a fourth of the population disappeared in those 4 years.
In a historical context, the idea of a radical government taking over, eliminating its enemies and trying to introduce a new government is not necessarily particularly new. But the Cambodia experience was a significant one relative to what Mao was doing in China.
Well, they just went at it much faster and much harder and much more dogmatically than the Vietnamese, the Chinese. The land reforms very costly in both those cases, but not costly to the same extent of this mistakes that they went after. They went after what they called mistakes and errors, and they just went out with this dogged determination and ended up with numbers that are very difficult to believe. If one thinks of Cambodia, as I often do, as a relatively peaceful place, like most countries, it's not a more violent place than other countries, but the numbers are incredible.
So, as John said, some of these people, Nun Chia, Pol Pot now is gone, but Nun Chia is in Pailin tilling his garden. There are many potential I guess, defendants in this trial who have houses in Phnom Penh. Is this not a source of hurt for Cambodians that they are allowed to walk free in the streets right now?
Yes. Well, again, the Cambodian people now, rely more on the leaders. They have nothing to deal directly by themselves, but they rely on the leaders, or whatever act to be committed or to be acted by the leaders. So they just leave to the leaders. And again, yes, they have freedom. They can walk. They can move from one place to the other. For example, like Mr. Khieu Samphan is now in Phnom Penh. He has a house here, and Mr. Ieng Sary as well, not very far from here. And he sometimes also travel to Bangkok for medical treatment.
Okay, let's take a brief pause if we can. We'll come back in just a couple minutes. One of the legacies of Cambodia's troubled history is the continuing threat posed by unexploded ordnance and landmines. There are still some 800 victims of landmines reported every that report. Welcome back to 101 East. We're at Tuol Sleng prison in Phnom Penh discussing the upcoming extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia procedure, the attempt to find justice or some kind of end to the Khmer Rouge years. David, let me ask you, the Khmer Rouge's ascent to power, how did that happen? How was that group of people who subsequently proved themselves to be really quite extreme managed to work their way into power?
Couldn't have happened without the Vietnam War. That's my one-line answer. They needed Vietnamese assistance. They needed the turbulence that was in Indochina. The Vietnamese helped them along the way. They also needed the kind of unpopularity that the United States ever had globally in that period. If you remember the 70s, this was a time when this seemed a good thing to do. They themselves rose to power because they had very tight control over the levers themselves inside the party. Very loyal to each other, Pol Pot and his associates, a group that formed in the early 1960s, went into the woods in the mid-1960s. This system didn't break until much later. These people stayed together, they talked together. There's a collective leadership. This is another point to be made about them. They talk about the Pol Pot regime. We love to demonize a single person, but this was much more collective than, say, Maoism was. This was a group of people thinking alike and running the revolution together.
How did you report it at the time?
I reported it not as a struggle between the Khmer Rouge and the Lon Nol government so much. It was right at the very beginning in 1970 when Prince Sihanouk was overthrown as leader of this country and Lon Nol took over, it was a war between the Lon Nol army, backed by the Americans and the South Vietnamese, and communist Vietnamese forces who were using Cambodia as a sanctuary for their war in Vietnam.
The Khmer Rouge were hidden in secret. We didn't know about them.
Right.
In the first year or so, we didn't talk about the Khmer Rouge. We didn't know. All the bodies on the battlefields we saw were Vietnamese. There were no Cambodians being killed, almost.
And from a Cambodian history, how did you grow up being informed of what happened?
I was 7 years old when the Khmer Rouge came to power. And then I witnessed the regime for 3 years, more than 3 years. And during the period, I also, learned a lot of things happening, even though I was young at the time. But again, I was forced to live in a children camp. And again, I was also asked to look after the water buffaloes and cows in the paddy fields.
Again, from your perspective, this special trial that's going on, is that response too little too late, or do you think it's adequate?
I don't think it's adequate at all. I think it's what's happened and it probably will happen. But is it justice? That's the question. I think it's too late for that. Are there other lessons to be learnt by having that sort of trial, which will hopefully heal some of the wounds here? That is questionable, but in a larger context, it's part of a process which the United Nations has been at for a number of years,
right,
which is trying to create an international sense of justice for crimes which are just too great to be covered over.
Will this trial process create healing in Cambodia? When this is over, will Cambodia be a better place?
At least, yes, it will put an end to the culture of impunity to one extent, to one particular case. And it's good for Cambodia, at least, to tell the younger leaders and younger generation that the impunity will not be, hidden.
Do you think there will be justice at the end of this? What would you like to see as a result? Fitted to this?
I think it's a process that's going on that he wants it to continue in ways that are pleasing to him, which is he can't stop it. If it stops through other reasons and his interference cannot be demonstrated, I don't think he'd be that sad about it. But it's going on. It's getting momentum now, and I think he'll take credit for this. He'll say, we've been trying to do this since 1997. Here it comes, and he said, yeah, that's.
How will the Western media report what's going on there? I think they will flock here, and they will report that it was an event which was too late, dealing with something from yesterday, and that the opportunities have been there's a lost opportunity it should have been done many years. So
they'll focus on the delay rather than the solution.
I think they will certainly focus on the delay, and I think they will rake over the murky past of the United States and why some of those things may not be addressed in the court. I don't know. So much of the history of what happened to the Khmer Rouge is now known, and there's lots of things that aren't known. But the great broad strokes of how many people died and how they died and what happened in this horrific place here is very well documented, because the Khmer Rouge documented it themselves.
Right. But you have to say that Cambodia has already moved on to an enormous extent. Here we are in Tuol Sleng prison, the heart of the horror of this entire regime. Pol Pot's final resting place up in An Long Beng is being turned into a tourist destination. It doesn't seem to create quite the same emotion anymore.
Well, but the point, who can expect that the trial process take for 10 years? From the first letter sent by the co-Prime Minister Hun Sen and Prince Norodom Ramrat in 1997. It was on the June 21st, 1997, asking Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN, for legal assistance to this process. But again, it drags on until today. It's already 10 years, and nobody expects that such kind of thing happen.
Well, we've spoken to the media, David. Let's put the final question to you. How will history interpret these processes? Tough question, but you have experience in this field.
The first answer is impossible to say, because that's what historians always say, because they talk about the future. But I think this will be just seen as a series of steps, and maybe this impunity thing will come into it. Maybe these old people having faced a bit of a jury, a little bit of embarrassment, is a positive step. The Khmer Rouge period is going to fade in importance, but they're going to know more about it. May start getting taught in the schools to a greater extent, which I think is a very good idea, so that people will start internalizing this is something that happened in their country, rather like people in Germany, students in Germany study that period, students in Japan do not. you know, this is still on the Japanese side of the, not denial is too strong a word, but maybe evasion, postponement, whatever. So that'll be, I think that's going to come out of this, is it's going to be, particularly after next year's election, when I think the current regime will cement itself in power even more than now. And they'll say, fine, teach the Khmer Rouge in school. That's no harm to us.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much
You're
indeed.
welcome.
And that's it from this edition of 101 East from Tol Sleng Prison in Cambodia.